therefore obviously makes other people who own gold worse off. So the question is that an externality? So I'm going to call for disambiguation this Jacob Israel from now on. If anyone has read the Bible, they'll know why that makes sense, but otherwise go read the Bible. So Israel, what is the...
So an externality isn't just
externality?
making someone worse off. If the market or the prices reflect the action, then it's not an externality. So if you find gold and gold prices fall as a result, then it's not an externality.
Yeah. So in particular, can you see the offsetting benefit that someone gets for every unit of harm that comes to the people who own gold?
Well, the people who would want to buy gold.
Exactly.
For them.
Yeah, so that's the key point, right? Is that whenever you have an externality that's mediated through prices, for every person harmed, there's another person benefited in equal and offsetting amounts, so that it's not really on net causing any harm to society. And that's like the key way that you can think about what's a pecuniary and what's a non-pecuniary externality. So these things, this discovery of gold is called a pecuniary externality. What a pecuniary externality means is it's not really an externality at all. It just sort of superficially seems to be an externality, but it's not actually, because it's mediated through the price system. Real externalities are ones that do not go through the price system. Yeah, Jingyi.
I was just wondering,
Yep.
do we also have to take into account the gain the finder of that pile of gold gets?
Well, but that's not external to him, right? I mean, that's something that he's taking into account because he's getting paid for that, right? The question is, what are the effects on everybody else, other than the person who takes the action, right? But that's a good question. Okay. So we should not internalize pecuniary externalities. And in fact, the most common misapplication of the theory of externalities comes from people claiming that there's pecuniary externalities that should actually be internalized. So one example of this is that often competitors will say, oh, that other company came in, and because they came in, I had to lower my prices. And that's a negative externality on me. Well, of course, that's not really true, right? Because for every unit of harm you got by having to lower your prices, the other person got a unit of benefit. A great example of that is, and that might sound a little comical, but this happens all the time. So I was very involved in debates over the credit card industry. And the merchants who accept credit cards, I don't know if you guys know this, they have to pay a fee in order to clear the credit card transactions. And they say, oh, this is really unfair because all the other people accepting credit cards sort of is forcing me to accept credit cards as well. And that's an externality. Well, no, it's not, because the consumer benefits by you accepting the credit card and you lose. And there's no net externality right there, right? So on the other hand, imagine that when a company enters the industry, the prices stay the same, but the new company comes in and steals some sales away from the existing company, and that reduces their profit. David, Weyl, is that an externality or not?
So they do it without lowering the
Yeah,
price.
no price gets lowered.
Mm-hmm.
I just come in, the other firm is charging some markup, and now I steal some of the sales away from them and earn that markup myself. Is that a real externality?
I don't think so. Is it?
Anyone else? Thoughts?
I can't think of an offsetting benefit external to the...
Exactly. Yeah, so that actually is an externality.
Because you're not paying for the sales.
Well, because the thing is, no one benefits from you stealing the sales away from that guy. The guy loses his profits. And who get benefits, right? I mean, the consumers are still getting the same product at the same price as before.
What do you mean
right?
by steal, though?
Well, what I mean is by steal is new food truck shows up, right? And maybe the prices stay the same, but now the other guy, the number of stuff he sells every day goes down because there's more competition. But imagine his prices don't fall at all.
You park your truck right in front of his.
Yeah.
Don't we benefit by having extra?
Well, the consumers might benefit from the diversity of the products, but imagine the products were exactly the same here, right? Imagine the prices didn't fall, products were the same, and and you just had this competition and that took some of the things away. That would be harmful. Now, in reality, there would be some offsetting benefits potentially associated with that, but this is a real externality that directly doesn't have any offsetting benefit. Yeah, Joe.
What about the benefit that like that company receives? Is that not?
No, that is. No, that's taken into account, but that's already internalized by the company, right? So we're trying to think externalities they have, right? The smoker internalizes the benefits he gets from smoking, but he doesn't internalize the harms on other people. And the point of externality policy is to get him to internalize that. Similarly, there's some competition policies that might have the goal of stopping people from being copycats of existing companies, right? Because that could steal sales away from them without really bringing down prices and might make people worse off. Yeah, Joe?
But wouldn't every loss that that company is gained by this company? So
it is.
It's just offset, but it just is not offset by some.
It is, but that person is going to take into, the problem is that if they don't take into account the harms that they're doing to other people, they're going to get to a point where they're basically indifferent to doing it because, like, look, for this company to come in to steal these sales, it might have to, set up a store, it might have to pay lots of costs, right? And so it might not actually be very beneficial to them to set up the company, and yet they're doing it and destroying all this value for the other company. And that's going to be wasteful, right? Because they're taking into account the benefits but not the harms, right? Yeah, Matt Solomon.
Isn't that why IP law exists? So
well, that's part of the reason why IP law exists. There's another reason too. So we'll talk lots about this sort of stuff later. But this is an important thing that whenever we think about industrial economics, we're going to want to think about the extent to which there are pecuniary externalities across companies, which we don't want to have internalized, versus real externalities across companies, which we do want to be internalized. Okay. A second example is free trade with China might cause people in the US to lose jobs. Well, what does that mean exactly? If there's free trade with China, the wages of people in the US went down. Now, if those wages went down all the way to the level in China, people wouldn't lose their jobs in the US. So it can't be that people are losing their jobs in the US any more than it's just that their wages are falling, right? So that's a pecuniary externality. Why? Because the people who hire those workers benefit, even though those workers are harmed, right? Polluting a lake could kill fish in that lake and therefore cause the price of fish to rise. But that is a pecuniary externality, not a real externality, the rise in the price of fish, because fishers from other lakes will benefit from that, even though consumers will be harmed. So, but on the other hand, it seems like polluting the lake has to be a real externality on someone. The question is, who is the victim of that real externality? Clemence?
The fisher that is in the lake, which is polluted.
Yeah, so imagine that he's just a fisher that's being hired by someone else who has the rights to fish in that lake. Then
it's the person that has the right to fish. Because
exactly. Because his wage would fall, but someone else would employ him, but there would be the offsetting benefit on his employer, right? So the real harm is on whoever owns the right to the fish that are destroyed by the pollution, right? Absolutely. Another example of this is imagine that you have a brilliant roommate who gets stoned and who used to blow the curve, but now the curve is much more generous, right? Is that a pecuniary or real externality? Well, it's a pecuniary externality because while you're benefited, the potential employers are harmed, right? Because now the grades are effectively slightly inflated for the class. And so they're getting tricked into hiring someone who's slightly less good because of that thing. So that's just a pecuniary externality, right? Another example of this is selective abortion. So there was a lot of selective abortion of women in China. And as a result, women have it really good in China. There's like tons and tons and tons of men. And there's like very few women. And so you might think that selectively killing your children would actually be like a positive externality on the women, but it's not, because it has an offsetting negative effect on the men who now have less women to match with, right? So effectively, there was a price in the labor market that was adjusting, and it was just a pecuniary externality, right? Okay, so even when there's not literal prices, you can have this distinction between pecuniary and real externalities. Okay, so this distinction shows up a lot in the law. So there's a distinction in the law between what are called physical damages and what are called purely economic damages. So physical damage is like I'm driving along the road and I hit a doctor and the doctor dies, right? Or I go and burn down your house, right? Now, they don't actually have to be physical. They could be like if I defame your character, right? If I tell some lies about you, that can be a direct damage as well. These are direct, if not physical, harms. Pure economic losses, on the other hand, are sort of follow-on effects. So if you look at the patients of that doctor who now go to another doctor, right? Those patients are harmed as well, but that's a pure economic loss because it's a pecuniary externality, right? The death of that doctor just raises the wages of the doctors in the town. That's harmful to the patients, but it's not a net harm. Similarly, if I burn down your house and as a result, the price of other houses in the neighborhood rises because there's less housing available, that benefits the people who are currently in the neighborhood, but it harms the people who might want to buy a house, and therefore it's not a real externality, it's just a pecuniary externality. Now, it's a little bit more subtle. What if the prices of the other houses in the neighborhood actually go down after the house burns down? Because it makes the neighborhood look ugly that that there's a burnt out lot. Charlie, son?
Yeah.
What do you think? Is that a real or a pecuniary externality? A pure economic or a physical damage?
I think it's pure economic.
Why?
Well, because there's no. No, it's tricky.
Wouldn't
Jacob?
the loss to the current homeowners be offset by the fact that other people can buy houses at lower prices?
No. Why not? David?
Well, it's because the neighborhood is uglier too, right? So like they would be
Exactly.
buying prices, but it would be a terrible neighborhood.
So there's no offsetting benefit, right? Because when the price comes down, it comes down because the value of the houses is now lower. It doesn't come down just because there's fewer available. You see what I mean? Or the utility you get out of the houses is lower. And so that case, it's actually a physical damage that's done to other people. And the reason is that people in the neighborhood weren't paying that person for having a beautiful house. If they were paying that person for having a beautiful house, well, then that person would lose those payments and it would accrue to the person whose house burnt down. But there was this externality that was being caused by that person. So when you destroy an externality, that is itself an externality, right? Because the externality wasn't internalized by the price system, and therefore changing it will not be internalized by the price system either, right? Now, I don't know if you guys remember the Deepwater Horizon spill from a couple of years ago, but there was huge lawsuits over what BP should pay for. And almost all the debates were about what was pure economic damages and what were real externality, real damages, physical damages they should have to pay for. So let's try going through some examples to fix our ideas about this. So first, let's think about the shrimping employees who lost their jobs as a result of the disaster. Those are some